Our journey in search of advanced knowledge and technology of antiquity will begin with the island of Crete. The island of Crete is located in the Mediterranean Sea and is the largest in Greece. Here at the foot of the mountains in Britain, the great god thunderer Zeus, the father of all Greek gods and goddesses, was born. And here in Crete, the European civilization was born. Like several thousand years ago, the numerous ports of the island still play a significant role in the development of trade. Thanks to them, the island has the status of one of the largest trading centers in the Mediterranean Sea. Not far from one of these ports were found the ruins of the Nas Palace, which is the center of ancient Minoan culture. To this day, the spirit of the legendary King Minos, the son of Zeus and Europe, whose name was named Minoan culture, is still in the rooms of the palace. Perhaps it was on this throne that the great king once sat down. Minotaur, a monster with a human body and a bull's head, according to legend, lived here in the labyrinth. Built by the mythical engineer Daedal. Of the interesting features of the Nas Palace, it can be noted the absence of walls or any other defensive structures. But if there were no walls, then how did the King Minos ensure the safety of his citizens? Without finding an answer to this question among the ruins of the Nas Palace, we decided to go to the local museum. The coins with the image of the island's guardian, the copper man Talos, gifted by the gods to the King Minos, were preserved in the museum. From the shore, he threw huge firecrackers that drowned enemy ships. If some ship still managed to escape the flood, and he sank to the shore. Then Talos entered the water. His bronze hull warmed up, and the ships burned to the ground. It sounds fabulous. But what if we abstract ourselves from fantasies and look at these myths from the perspective of modern technical science?
The first giant robot was Talos, and it can be called a robot in the whole world. Obviously, it was not a human, it was an android robot. And if we abstract ourselves from the fact that this is a myth, then the only assumption is that it was, well, if we do not take into account that magic could have existed then, which revives the non-living and the giant, then it can only be some kind of alien technology.
But let's not rush to conclusions. Some scientists offer a different explanation. They link the appearance of the myth of Talos with the progress in metallurgy, as if local blacksmiths reached such heights in this area that a certain master decided to surprise everyone with the creation of a copper man. Hence, it can be assumed that Talos was, if not the first copper man, then at least one of the first. However, in myths, Talos is called the last of the copper jacinorods. Consequently, we should not even talk about the dawn, but about the sunset of metallurgy. But then it turns out either a paradox in the form of a simultaneous rise and fall of metallurgy, or one part of the myth is worth believing, and the other is not. Elementary logic speaks of the precondition of such an approach. We will go the other way, on which we will take into account all the facts, and just see where it will lead us. Is it possible that the story about Talos was simply invented by an ancient author? It would be a logical explanation if the myth about him was the only mention of androids. However, the mention of androids and other robots is not the only one. There are also other ancient myths, They relate to the time of the rise of the next post-Cretan Minoan civilization, Mycenaean, with a political center in the city of Mycenae. According to legend, the Mycenaeans were founded by the ancient Greek demigod Perseus, the son of the god Zeus and the daughter of the Argos king Danae. The legendary king Agamemnon once lived here. It is possible that his golden mask is kept in the Museum of Athens today. Agamemnon led the Achaean army on a campaign of Troy, and his monumental dome tomb attracts numerous tourists today. Amazing with the quality of construction and the size of the blocks. The only written sources that came to us from Mycenaean civilization are the so-called tablets, with a linear letter B. However, the texts on these tablets do not tell about the king Agamemnon, the Trojan War, or the secrets of the Mycenaean archipelago. They are purely domestic. They contained information about the number of heads of cattle, grain, lists of warriors, and descriptions of property. The events of Mycenaean Greece were told to us by the works of the ancient Greek poet Homer. From the Iliad and Odysseus, we learned the story of the love of Paris and Helen of Troy, the feud between Achilles and Agamemnon, as well as the wanderings of Odysseus. However, when carefully reading Homer's poems, you can notice a number of interesting details, namely, the mention of automated mechanisms, whose similarity with modern ones is simply amazing. These mechanisms move from a certain inner energy according to a preset program, and are now called robots. It sounds almost incredible, but for the first time in human history, robots are mentioned in the Iliad. And according to Homer's descriptions, they were assembled by gods. In the Iliad, Homer mentions the golden mechanical servants of the god Hephaestus, endowed with speech and mind. The golden servants ran up in a moment, like a living goddess, who has a mind in her breast, and a voice and a power, which the immortal gods taught to the most various labors. In Homer's poems, we also meet the mention of self-moving tripods and automatically working blacksmiths. But the most impressive is the mention of ships by Homer of Odysseus, which, according to the description, are no different from modern ships on an air pillow. A little to the ground, touching his feet, his ship makes its way easily. Raising the stern, he ran, and, with a purple wave behind him, his noisy sea rushed forward. He sailed without hindrance, and the falcon, the fastest among the feathers of the sky, would not have caught up with him in flight. And the description of the Phaeacian ships given in Odysseus is quite amazing. After all, according to this description, the ships had a built-in navigator, used artificial intelligence and machine learning, and were also completely invisible and invulnerable. Today, modern military aircraft have such functionality.
I cannot exclude, I will formulate it this way, that these were self-controlled boats with an autopilot, more advanced than the land of civilizations. Because sometimes there are such details which would be very difficult for the ancients to come up with.
But where could the mention of such technologies have come from several thousand years ago? Homer was a wandering singer-teller or a poet, and, according to the ancient Greek philosopher Plutarch, he studied with the ancient Egyptian priests. Therefore, we will also go to Egypt in search of the truth. And the Eads, while singing, performed excerpts from the ancient Greek epic accompanied by stringed instruments. This is how information was transmitted from mouth to mouth until literacy reappeared in Greece. But could the oral tradition transmit information without distortion?
In ancient times, the technique of oral transmission of information, even in the form of verses, was the most accurate, because human memory is a much more reliable tool than paper. Therefore, the oral transmission of a work, which must be reproduced with accuracy to a comma or a pause, is more reliable than written transmission. And, in general, the origins of many ancient Greek knowledge, ancient Greek beliefs, mysteries, go down to the roots in ancient Egypt.
The origins of the myth of the Argonauts are also found in Egypt, in which the copper warrior Talos is mentioned. Its author, Apollo Radoski, for a long time was the head of the Alexandrian Library, where all the knowledge of that time flowed, and it is possible that he had access to hidden sources from which he could borrow some ideas. The library itself did not burn once and was completely destroyed. And today it is necessary to look for any traces relating to ancient mechanisms in the Cairo Egyptian Museum. The Cairo Egyptian Museum is the largest in the world storage of objects of ancient Egyptian art. Its collection contains about 160,000 exhibits. The same number of scrolls, and perhaps even more, could be stored in the Alexandrian Library. Walking through the halls of the museum, we came across several interesting artifacts, which are very similar to modern parts from mechanical devices. This is, first of all, a stone vase with a thickness of a few millimeters. Today, a similar design has a lightweight flywheel, used in machine building, made of alabaster. Cylindrical shape of the vase, reminiscent of a fencing lattice of air ducts installed in front of the fans, as well as objects that look like unusual gears or locking washers with outer teeth. Other items are also exhibited in the museum, and scientists argue about the purpose of which. Pythagoras, who studied the ancient Egyptian priests, believed that the sphere of the universe arose from the dodecahedron. This analogy may seem strange to us. However, this is only at first glance.
About 10 years ago, the French astronomer, or rather astrophysicist Jean-Paul Luminet, and his colleagues, studying experimental data on anisotropy and reluctant radiation, found that at certain frequencies, anisotropy associated with the 12-faceted sphere is detected. Jean-Paul Luminet interpreted this 12-faceted sphere as a 12-faceted sphere that is a platonic body, that is, an ordinary pentadodecahedron, where the faces are pentagons. Since then, the idea has been established that the universe has the shape of a pentadodecahedron.
What other astronomical knowledge was available to the ancients? The Pyramid of Cheops on the Giza Plateau is a living proof of how perfect astronomical measurements were in ancient times. The sides of the Pyramid of Cheops are perpendicular almost perfectly to the sides of the world. The deviation is no more than 3 angular minutes. This is an exceptional accuracy for any structure of any era. How did the builders manage to achieve such accuracy? A very simple question about the meaning that anyone can ask. I want to take the direction to the north, to the polar star, to whatever you want, in order to build a structure with a side of 200 meters. Everyone can imagine 200 meters well. These are 2 football fields. Now I want to direct it exactly to the north. In order to do this, I want to, normally I can look there with my eye, figure out how much it will be, how it is done. The pole is here and the pole is there. Now I can combine these 2 poles. Look. What will be my angular size? What will it be? Now I can do the following. I will make a pipe of papyrus, pull a hair, I will have such a visor. And I will look there. There will also be an angular size. So this angular size is not enough to ensure the accuracy that the Egyptians would have achieved in the construction of the pyramid. This hair, if they used hair, would not be enough. Accuracy, because they have 3 centimeters by 200 meters. And anyone can estimate. Therefore, the question is how they did it. And the second question, if they did it, why? If the pyramids of Cheops are a physical evidence of the accuracy of astronomical knowledge in antiquity, then accurate theoretical knowledge in this area should be sought in the works of ancient Greek scientists. The first scientist to accurately calculate the size of the Earth was the head of the Alexandria Library of the 3rd century BC, Herodotus. Herodotus discovered that in 2 cities, located, as we now know, on one meridian, he was also able to make sure of this. On the day of the summer solstice, such a picture is observed. In one of them, more southern, the sun is located at noon exactly in the zenith, and in the other, which is located north, the sun does not fall into the zenith, but is at a fairly high altitude, but still to the south of the zenith. And having measured the corresponding angle, he thus obtained the angular distance between the 2 cities on the surface of the earth. That is, the angle formed in the center of the earth in the direction of one city and the second. And further, in order to translate this angular distance into a physical one, it was necessary to simply measure the distance in space between these 2 cities. Thus, he calculated the length of the circumference of the earth, but then corrected the resulting figure, reducing the error. At the same time, it is not clear how exactly he corrected it, and all this machination with the correction of the already obtained value rather resembles an adjustment to the previously known result. And he got an outstanding result with an error of less than 1%. It is interesting that the measurements made a century later by the ancient Greek astronomer Poseidon worsened the Erdos Phenar result by 7 times. The error of the measurements of the famous astronomer Claudius Ptolemy turned out to be more than 36 times. And in the 9th century, the Baghdad Caliph Al-Mamun, using the best technologies of his time, got a result 10 times worse. And until the 17th century, the results of the Erdos Phenar remained unsurpassed. It is still unclear how exactly the scientist managed to make such precise astronomical measurements without the necessary tools. In the past, the gnome was used to measure angles. A simple tool representing a vertical column with a perpendicular horizontal base. It is said that as a gnome, the scientist used a large obelisk. But what is the accuracy of this approach? Erdos Phenar took the longest vertical object that he could use, and this allowed him to achieve a fairly high accuracy. Of course, it was limited by the angular dimensions of the sun, the angular limit of the resolution of the eye, and such a characteristic error is the angular diameter of the sun, which is half a degree. Thus, the error of the measurements in this approach will be about half a degree. However, Erdosfina reached 4 minutes, which is almost 8 times more accurate. Erdosfina is also known for accurately measuring the angle of the ecliptic slope. His error was only 7 minutes. All these results speak of an incredible accuracy of measurements. However, this accuracy is usually attributed to a random coincidence and luck. Or maybe everything we talked about earlier is just a coincidence. Homer rightfully predicted the emergence of robots and modern ships. It is quite accidental that Plato's dodecahedron agrees with the discoveries in the field of devices of the universe. Erdosfina unexpectedly accurately carried out astronomical calculations. Isn't there too much coincidence? Rather, it is not about coincidences, but about the transfer of knowledge. And there is a reason for this. After all, according to ancient sources, Homer, Plato, and Epiphagor, they all studied from ancient Egyptian priests. Apollonius and Erdosfina were managers of the Alexandrian Library, a treasure trove of knowledge of the entire ancient world. But did the Egyptians have robots, high-speed ships, instruments that would allow them to accurately orient the pyramid around the sides of the world and calculate the dimensions of the earth? Obviously not. However, in ancient times, perhaps there were even more advanced instruments. So, the English philosopher of the 13th century, Roger Bacon, who belonged to the limited circle of esoterics, wrote, "In ancient times, such sea-flying devices were created that large ships without fins crossed rivers, and seas controlled by one person, and at a greater speed than if they were filled with fins. Carriages that moved without heads of animals with unimaginable speed. Instruments for flight, so that a person would sit in the middle of the instrument, rotating a certain invention with which the artificially created wings moved. Instruments for traveling under the water of seas and rivers up to the bottom, and without any bodily danger." In fact, Bacon describes a civilization that, according to its technological development, is comparable to the modern one. What civilization is he talking about? Myths tell that the gods created the copper guardian telos, automatic mechanisms from the poem Gomera, and taught people technologies and science. It is known that the god Hephaestus, patron of blacksmithing and inventions, lived among people for several years, and Prometheus transmitted not only fire to people, but also taught literacy, construction, astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and sea-flying. Apparently, for our distant ancestors, the gods were real beings. In the 3rd century BC, the Egyptian priest Maniphon created a list of Egyptian rulers, and along with the pharaoh's dynasties, included the gods of the rulers in it, starting with Ptah, and including the gods Ra, Osiris, Ora, as well as other deities. And the teacher of Pythagoras, Pharisee, revealed to his contemporaries all the truth about the gods, describing their nature and origin. On the Polran stone, on the Turin papyrus, and on the Barossa, it is said about the 3 generations of rulers that existed before the pharaoh's dynasties. The penultimate was those going beyond the mountain, and before that there were 2 more divine dynasties. But, of course, if they were successive, the knowledge was transmitted, otherwise they could not continue this line. And the Egyptian civilization, in general, arises as if from scratch. A civilizational package in the form of a complex calendar, very complex hieroglyphic writing, monumental architecture, which corresponds to the laws of geometry and mathematics, cannot be born in the heads of the earthmen. It can only be brought from the outside. It turns out that in ancient times some scientific knowledge was passed on to people by some high-tech civilization of the gods. And it is possible that it was they that aroused the craving of our ancestors for the development of technology. However, only after several millennia of hard scientific work, we were able to bring such technologies into reality.